Elation in the city of Kherson as Russian occupation comes to an end. It's one of Ukraine's biggest military achievements and a major setback for Moscow. But does it spell doom for Putin's offensive or just a misstep in what could be years of fighting ahead? I'm Andrij Dobriansky, and today's newsmaker is the Kherson withdrawal. The people of Kherson may be free from Russian occupation, but it seems freedom is just about all they have. As Russian troops withdrew, the city's ruined infrastructure was laid bare. No water, no power, and no internet. Explosives technicians are working to demine the area, and there are fears among some that Russian soldiers may have remained behind in disguise. And though Russia denies it, President Volodymyr Zelensky says local investigators have uncovered evidence of more than 400 war crimes committed by Russian soldiers.
The bodies of the killed are being found, both civilians and military. In Kherson region, the Russian army left behind the same atrocities as in other regions of our country where it was able to enter. We will find and bring to justice every murderer without a doubt.
Well, it's not just Ukrainians celebrating Russia's withdrawal from Kherson. Kiev's Western allies hope it could signal a time for talks. President Biden says the timing of negotiations is up to Ukraine, but in recent months, Biden's top national security advisor has been engaged in confidential conversations with Putin's senior aides. With the U.S. and its allies spending billions on assistance for Ukraine, peace would mean a win for all. Last Monday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia is open to achieving its goals through negotiations. And on a visit to Kherson, President Zelensky said, "We are ready for peace." But even if both countries come to the table, it won't be easy to reach an agreement. Russia is unlikely to give up its gains, and Zelensky has made it clear that he won't concede an inch of Ukrainian territory. Let's look now at where territorial gains stand.
Kherson, along with Luhansk, Donetsk and Zaporizhia, was proclaimed part of Russia by President Vladimir Putin at a ceremony at the Kremlin in September. But on Friday, Moscow's forces retreated back across the Dnipro River. It surrendered Kherson city, the only provincial capital it had captured in the war, and ceded other important strategic positions. One of those is the Dnipro River itself. It's a major transportation artery for Ukraine, and its dams provide power to Ukrainian industry. President Zelensky says fighting in the eastern region of Donetsk has intensified in recent days. Russia has sought control of the wider Donbas region, which contains Ukraine's industrial hub. And as Kiev pushes to liberate Russian-captured territories, the result has been what Zelensky describes as hellish battles. Zaporizhia remains in Russian hands, but the nuclear power plant there has been shut down, and the International Atomic Energy Agency has deployed a team to monitor it. Putin says he will use all available means to protect the regions he has incorporated into Russia. Most alarmingly, he's hinted at the possible use of nuclear weapons to defend what he sees as his country's territory.
So Russia may have withdrawn from Kherson, but is the conflict any closer to being over? Joining me now to debate that are, from New York, Andrij Dobriansky. He is the chair of UN Affairs at the Ukrainian World Congress. In Moscow, we have Sergey Markov, a former member of the Russian parliament and a professor at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. And from Washington, Elisabeth Braw. She's a senior research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, we've seen the celebrations in Kherson, but they have been cautious. Andrij, to what extent should they be cautious? Because Russia has not surrendered, and no one actually knows what Moscow is planning next.
This isn't the first area of Ukraine that's been liberated. So yes, everybody celebrated over the weekend. It was a joyous scene, probably something we haven't seen as a world since World War II. But the next morning, it goes back to being in danger. We're going to need international monitors to flood that area to find the mass graves. We're going to need international forensics volunteers to be able to document all those crimes. And first and foremost, for the safety of those people, we need to make sure that the areas of that very large city that have been booby-trapped, the mines are disabled. Areas for crossing will need to be clearly delineated. And lastly, as we had in the areas of Kharkiv, as well as other areas of Donetsk and Luhansk that have been liberated recently, international organizations, specifically the United Nations, is calling on aid from the West to make sure that those areas where infrastructure has been completely destroyed by the Russian state, we need to make sure that those people living in those areas that have now been liberated have enough areas of warmth for the winter, have
Right.
enough food and medicine. So that's the important thing right now.
Okay, but you said first the accusations of war crimes that will need to be investigated. I mean, to what extent do you really think that should be the priority at this point?
It has to be, because you can't go back months later and try to find this. This is what we saw in Bucha. This is what we saw outside of Kharkiv. We saw volunteers, librarians, cooks, volunteer firefighters. These are the people who are going out and digging up the mass graves of their friends, their family members. They are making sure they document with pictures any signs of violence on these bodies. We need to make sure that this is all documented prior to having a proper burial, which is what the families want as soon as possible. So this is why it has to happen now.
Okay. Sergey, let me come to you. First, I just want to ask, why did Russia withdraw like this? And has it effectively let go of Kherson?
Russia withdrew from Kherson because it was a real threat that Kiev regime can explode Kakhovka Dam, and which is upper by Dnieper River. And as a result, a huge amount of water can go to the Kherson, and Dnieper could be twice bigger, and position of Russian army could be dramatic, and also position of civilians can be very much dramatic. We know that Kiev regime use terroristic methods systematically, and they're targeting Kakhovka Dam already many weeks, exactly as they targeting Zaporozhye atomic power station already 3 months using the nuclear terrorism. We know that these people ready to kill thousands of Ukrainian people who support Russia. And now,
okay, but just to be, I need to clarify with what you've said so far. So you don't believe that Russia pulled out of Kherson because it was effectively defeated on the battlefield, but only because of the threat to the dam you're referring to?
Yes, of course, the Russian army appeared to be in a very difficult situation, but at the same time, of course, it's because Russian army appeared to be in the weak situation now. The reason is very easily. Russian army now twice less than Ukrainian army. Nevertheless, Russian population 5 times more than Ukrainian population. The reason is very easily. And
so will Russia go back for Kherson at some point?
Yes, absolutely. Kherson is a Russian city. It's part of the Russian Federation now. Kherson populated by Russians. The language of these people, Russian language. This language is prohibited by Kiev repressive Russophobic regime. Of course, Russia is going to come back to Kherson, not only to Kherson, but also we're going to liberate Odessa, Nikolaev, Kharkiv, and others. Now, after mobilization of 300,000 people, these people now in the training centers, and to the end of this month, these people will be in Russian army, and Russian army will be more already than the Ukrainian army, and will start is attacking.
So Russia will actually be able to recruit more soldiers from the territories they have laid claim to in eastern Ukraine. Very interesting. Elisabeth?
No. Russia is not going to have mobilization in Kherson. That's the Zaporozhye reason. No, Russia already conducted mobilization 300,000 people in another part of the Russian Federation. And these people are now in the training center. They're coming to the army. And the main reason of success of Ukrainian army will disappear. Probably Kherson is less chance for Ukrainian army to go forward.
Okay, so, Elisabeth, then having heard what Sergey what Sergey's analysis is. I mean, is it premature then for people in Kherson to be celebrating?
Well, I think what it really bears reminding everybody of is how important infrastructure is. So Kherson has obviously had power cut and so forth in recent weeks and months, and all of those things will have to be restored in order for people to return and be able to live some sort of a normal life again. And so you can celebrate for one night, but this is where the unsung heroes who staff electricity substations, who look after power plants, who look after water provision or water infrastructures and so forth, they will have to do their work to make the city livable and safe to live in for the people who have remained there and who may want to return. And I think I don't think it can be emphasized enough how important infrastructure and the people who operate the infrastructure are. They are really sort of the next line behind the military in any war.
Okay. Andrij, let me come back to you, and I do want to get your thoughts on what Sergey had to say. I mean, specifically the fact that this is not at all over for Russia. They haven't given up Kherson, and they will effectively go back and fight for what they believe is theirs.
Thank you. It's very important to push back on things that aren't true. So we started this segment with those wonderful images from Kherson, which the invading state mentioned 87% of those people had voted to join Russia. I think you saw in the image that was behind you and during the opening that it's clear that the city of Kherson stood with Ukraine. So it's impossible for whatever is coming out of Russia to say that, that these people wanted to be a part of Russia. And I also need to push back on these claims about Ukraine targeting, say, the dam. This is the same thing we heard when Bucha was liberated, that Russia was saying that Bucha was targeted by Ukraine. The same thing when we saw that horrible war crime of the drama theater in Mariupol that housed women and children, and it was bombed by Russia. The next day, the Russian state came out and said that this was Ukraine that bombed it. So in much the same way, whenever we hear that it is Ukraine apparently targeting their own infrastructure, which would keep their people warm during the winter, we need to push back on that and understand that we've seen time and again during this war where Russia has failed to take over the Ukrainian state, where the Ukrainian people have demonstrated their own liberation. We need to push back on the fact that what is happening is a failed war of occupation by the Russian state.
Okay, Sergey, I mean, we've heard many times from those outside of Russia who support Ukraine that there's a Russian propaganda machine at work that distorts the picture of what's happening, and you believe as well, and this is a line the Kremlin has said, that really the United States is what's just pulling so many strings behind the scenes, and you've said specifically Ukraine is a proxy for the U.S., and that this battle for Kherson was a proxy battle as well. Is that still what is believed out of the Kremlin, that Ukraine really isn't in control?
It's not only Russians believe. I think our colleagues also know about this. But the difference between us, I can say the truth. They have to lie. Because I am on the right side of the history. They're on the wrong side of the history, and they support absolutely clear repressive regime. The issue of war crime is very important. And we know that a lot of falsification about this, which made by Kiev repressive regime and his, I would say, masters from Washington and London. But everybody can compare itself. Look at the Mariupol. In Mariupol, Ukrainian forces fight 2 months using in dramatic scale Russian civilians as a human shield, and as a result, thousands and thousands of civilians have been killed during this fighting. But in Kherson, when Russia appeared to be on the same situation, Russia didn't use civilians and human shield. Russia, first of all, evacuated more than half of the population of Kherson to another Russian regions. And also Russians didn't fight and never used civilians and human shield. It's because for Russians, these people, our people, we're liberating them. But
Okay.
for Ukrainian army, which is proxy army of United States, this is not their people. And they're ready to allow thousands of civilians to be killed. Same with Bucha. People in Bucha, civilians, who've been killed by Ukrainian authorities because they took a humanitarian aid from Russian authorities. And they just claim that Russians did it.
Okay.
It's absolutely clear fake news which can be created by Kiev repressive regime.
All right, Elisabeth, let's move it forward then at this point, because there's talk now of going somehow into peace negotiations, but we have to ask where there would be room for compromise if negotiations go forward. Ukraine says it wants its territory back. Russia has been less clear about exactly what it's after, but still we know that they are not going to be willing, especially at this point, to cede any gains, especially if, listening to Sergey, they're planning to go back for Kherson anyway. So where would even be a starting point for negotiations?
That starting point is extremely elusive, and so this is the problem or the dilemma in any war. The two parties will, each party will only want to engage in peace negotiations if they think it's beneficial to them, and it's clearly only going to be beneficial to one side. So the side that is winning will be willing to engage in negotiations, but the side that is losing will try to turn the tide and start winning, and then engage in peace negotiations. And it really only then works when one side is losing so badly that there is no chance of it winning anymore, turning the tide anymore. And I think that is what Ukraine is hoping for at this point, that they have that Ukrainian armed forces have turned the tide enough for Russia to at some point in a not too distant future concede that this is not going to go Russia's way, and they will be trying to stem their losses by giving concessions in peace negotiations.
Okay.
But as we did hear from Sergey, clearly that point has not arrived for Russia yet.
Right.
And at the same time, Ukraine has turned the tide significantly in its favor.
Andrij, would you be more willing to define any sort of starting point, or do you think it's as elusive as Elisabeth was describing?
We've heard both President Zelensky and President Biden on the same page about this. Ukraine's territory needs to be returned to Ukraine, and then negotiations can happen. As far as the Russian invaders, they will be hunted down for the rest of their lives. This is going to be decades and decades of work. Any military officer that crossed over into Ukraine will never be safe. Any officer who, for instance, castrated a Ukrainian soldier live online, that person will not be safe. He will be hunted down. Anybody whose military unit came into a Ukrainian village and raped children as young as 4 or women as old as 82.
But Andrij, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean, of course, there needs to be accountability at some point. But if we can't even get to a starting point for negotiations so that proper investigations can be done and proper prosecutions can be carried out, that is even more elusive, thinking about actual accountability for the crimes that you've seen or believe have been committed. So I'll ask again about
the.
Go ahead.
You're talking about this. You're talking about the sovereign territory of a signatory to the founding of the United Nations. This is what we're talking about here in terms of Ukraine's territorial integrity. If Ukraine's territorial integrity, again, a signatory to the founding of the United Nations, that we would not have this kind of action that we're seeing today. If the rest of the world can't agree to that, then there's no hope for peace anywhere.
Okay. Sergey, go ahead.
I think all the world is waiting some peace in Ukraine. But this is one not about the territories, and especially for Russia. Russia maybe is the biggest, country in the world by territories. We don't need more territories. We immediately agree, okay, take these territories and so on. But only if these people will be in the security conditions. It means that will be no terrorist government in Kiev as now. If it will be not Russophobic government. The Russian language, which is language of the probably 70 or 80% of the population of Ukraine, should have official status of language of education. It should be prohibited. Just 3 days ago, Russian language, which is language for the 90% of the people in Kiev, have been prohibited for using in kindergarten even. So this is clear Russophobic regime, and we disagree with anti-Russia. This is not Ukraine now. Ukraine finished. Ukraine killed by United States of America, and it's anti-Russia. Our demands for negotiations very easily: liberation of all political prisoners. Russian language as official language, second official language with Ukrainian language, and also neutralization and democratization of Ukraine. All terrorist structures, institutions should be devoted and prohibited in Ukraine. It's absolutely clear. It's not the deal about territories. It's the deal about freedom of Ukraine.
Okay, then Elisabeth, those sound like, negotiable asks. So what's wrong?
Well, what's wrong is both sides clearly, as is the case in any war, both sides stake out maximum positions. Russia is willing to concede nothing. Ukraine, understandably, wants all its territory back, and I think we're at the point where that is becoming a realistic prospect for Ukraine, which is why the Ukrainian government wants to push on and is even it's even a realistic prospect for Ukraine to get Crimea back, since it has stemmed the tide in other parts of Ukraine. So we are at this really pivotal moment where Ukraine is not only making gradual advances, but is able to make significant breakthroughs, which puts all of those things that maybe months ago seemed unrealistic, puts that into some sort of realistic scenario, which is why I don't think we'll see peace negotiations anytime soon, because Ukraine will want to push on, whereas we're seeing again and again Russia and clearly committed to try to reverse that development. So I'm sorry to keep sticking with that elusive point, but
your point is understood. Yeah. You know what, Andrij, let me ask you about this though, because in the meantime, Zelensky has said that this victory proves that aid via weapon supplies from Western powers was actually a game changer here. And there were concerns, especially if Republicans took legislative power earlier, that the U.S. would maybe taper off those weapon supplies. So do you think now Ukraine can expect to get those supplies to keep coming and be able to continue this fight as they have and continue making gains?
I think we saw in the last week, Washington already announced another drawdown of more weapons for Ukraine. And later this month, Congress is back in session as of today in the United States. And we expect, with the budget resolution that needs to pass by December 16th, to have another balloon payment fund reallocating money for purchase of weapons that have been drawn down and sent to Ukraine. I want to very much clarify for the rest of the world that the United States isn't sending pallets of cash to Ukraine. Merely what is primarily doing is taking existing stocks of weapons that it has purchased in the past and sending those to Ukraine. And that's what needs to be replenished by the United States budget. I think we also will see probably more efforts by the rest of the world. We should probably finally see more armaments coming out of Germany and the United Kingdom, as well as other European states, to be sent to Ukraine to finally put a message to Russia that it has failed in this endeavor, and all of its military adventurism, whether it's Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, even the Kuril Islands in Japan, all of that needs to be taken back. And Russia needs to be demilitarized for the world to have a peaceful future.
Okay. Sergey, I'll give you some final comments then on that last... do you think the West and the United States, via Ukraine then, because you believe it is a proxy, are pushing toward actually demilitarizing Russia somehow and making it effectively a much weaker state?
Of course, Western countries use Ukraine for the attacking against Russia. Everybody understands that. They dream to overthrow Vladimir Putin and to impose a puppet regime in Russia, as they had such puppet regime in Russia in the 90s, and as they have this puppet regime in Ukraine. Where Russians understand this very well, that's why we're fighting for our freedom and independence. Also, we're fighting for freedom of our brothers in Ukraine, we're striving from policy of the government of terror from Kiev regime. And how it will finish, I believe that the time for negotiation will be something on February or on March, when Russia will try to use these 300,000 mobilized people, and we will see a result of the military clashes during the winter. And after Russia will take control of the couple of the big Russian cities on the eastern and southern part of Ukraine, immediately all Western leaders will come say, oh, please stop, please let's start negotiation. Without victory of Russian army, no chance for negotiation. We know it's for sure.
Okay. Sergey Markov, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank Andrij Dobriansky, Sergey, of course, and Elisabeth Braw as well, so much for joining us on this edition of The Newsmakers. We, of course, will be seeing how all of this unfolds, and we'll be re-exploring events in Ukraine in the weeks and months to come. Thanks again for being with us, and thanks to our viewers as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter @the_newsmakers, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.